from the Ukrainian side. That was the Ukrainian demand in Jeddah a couple of weeks ago. And it was very interesting that the day after that was when the intelligence was switched back on, and the day after that was when the Ukrainians pounded Russia and hit several Russia key infrastructure and energy places. And just today, Ukraine has struck Astrakhan refinery. So that's the only mention of Ukraine. But the background to this is that Trump doesn't care about Ukraine. Russia's proved it can't even get to Kyiv, never mind getting to the Atlantic and therefore threatening America one day. So he doesn't care. What he cares about is China. He wants this one sorted. Whether and if that requires selling out Ukraine, he is prepared to do that. And this isn't a bright side, this is a realistic view. They have come to the conclusion in the United States that Ukraine cannot reconquer the territory that it had stolen from it in this illegal war. And if you conclude that they cannot reconquer that territory and you want to sort this peace out, you will persuade Ukraine, you're not going to do it, especially without our help, sign here. So it is going to be dictated to them. Let's see what Zelensky says. I think we can get a 30-day ceasefire out of this. The longer-term issue, we'll have to wait for.
Yeah. Tim, I'm just going to pause here just because it's coming up towards 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
We just need to take our news bulletin, but I hope we might be able to catch you for another couple of minutes, in a few minutes, if that's okay, because I know our listeners really value your insight and expertise. We'll try and sort that out in the meantime. That's Tim Marshall, the author of Prisoners of Geography and former foreign correspondent. Do keep in touch with us this evening. You can WhatsApp us 0333 003 2353, or you can text 87222 and start your message with the word Times. Lots of you responding to this. Paul says Trump and Putin are in cahoots. Do not trust Trump. We know that Putin cannot be trusted. Ukraine must be victorious. There is no other way for future peace and justice. NATO countries and their allies, excluding the USA, must resist any softening that Trump and Putin propose of Ukraine's stance against Russia. The USA are becoming what Putin wants. How embarrassing for them. We are keeping a lookout for European reaction and, crucially, Ukrainian reaction to all of this as well. Stay with us. This is Times Radio.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio, the voice of the Times.
Hello, good evening. It's just gone 6 o'clock. This is Times Radio Drive. I'm Calum MacDonald. The headline this evening: President Putin of Russia has rejected an immediate ceasefire in Ukraine and instead has outlined his terms for a truce. We'll continue to bring you the best analysis of this. Throughout MacDonald and Friends over the next hour, we'll be joined by Rachel Cunliffe, Associate Political Editor of the new Statesman, and Noa Hoffman, Political Correspondent from the Sun. And in news that came as a shock to me earlier, we're about to live stream on YouTube as well. Good grief. If you'd like to watch along, then you can find the Times Radio YouTube channel. Just go to youtube.com and type in Times Radio. We'll get stuck in with further analysis after the news. Here's Laura Cook.
Thank you. Good evening. A limited ceasefire has been agreed by Russia. Steps towards peace have been outlined. This comes after a phone call between Presidents Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. Times Radio's Will Hobbs gives an insight into what was said.
To start with, Russia has agreed to stop attacking Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Talks over a full peace deal will begin in the Middle East imminently, beginning with a ceasefire in the Black Sea. There was also agreement that a stronger relationship between Russia and the US was beneficial, and deals on economic and geopolitical stability can be achieved when peace is agreed.
Times World Affairs editor Catherine Philp explained to Times Radio what the detail has been announced by the White House.
We see this constant reiteration that we get from Donald Trump about this conflict should never have started. Well, that's meaningless. We are here where we are, but he always needs to get that in. And I think the sheer amount of that statement, very brief, that is given over to issues that aren't about Ukraine, that are about the bilateral relationship and those hints about enormous economic deals, shows us what Donald Trump may have in mind by making peace with Russia.
A Labour MP has told Times Radio some of the measures around personal independence payments, or PIPs, could negatively affect people claiming the measure who have health conditions. Work and Pensions Secretary Liz Kendall set out new measures today to help save up to £5 billion by 2030 by cutting the bill for welfare. As part of that, PIPs will not be frozen to help encourage some people back into work. Rachel Maskell, Labour MP for York Central, told us employers must take some responsibility for this too.
Employers play a major role in this, in first of all stopping people falling out of work through ill health, and then being there to receive people into work and keeping people in work. We know so many disabled people end up going down the work capability route on their performance, or even getting bullied out of the workplace. That's not acceptable, and employers need to change too.
Israel's government says it has the right to return to war after Hamas stopped releasing hostages following a night of fresh airstrikes on Gaza. Palestinian officials say more than 400 were killed as a fragile truce there appears to be in pieces. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has appealed for calm.
For the ceasefire to be fully respected. Second, for humanitarian aid to have access to Gaza in an unimpeded way. And third, for the unconditional release of hostages.
An independent task force will now investigate complaints of bullying, harassment and discrimination in the military. It's among new initiatives after an inquest found systemic failures had contributed to the death of 19-year-old soldier Jaisley Beck. And 2 astronauts stuck in space for over 9 months are expected to finally return to Earth tonight. Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams were meant to be there for only 8 days, but problems with their Starliner rocket meant they had to stay for longer. And for a news bulletin when you want it, search for the Times News Briefing on the Times Radio app.
Across the UK, on DAB digital radio, on the free Times Radio app, and via your smart speaker.
Times Radio Drive with NatWest Cushion.
Hello, good evening. It's 6:05 on Tuesday evening, the 18th of March. Thank you for being with us. This is MacDonald and Friends. While John Pienaar has a day off, thank you very much for being with us. Through till 7 o'clock, we'll continue to discuss the news that's been breaking on this programme in the last hour or so. Russia says it's agreed to stop striking energy facilities in Ukraine for 30 days as a first step towards a halt in fighting altogether. It follows a 90-minute call between President Putin of Russia and President Trump. The Kremlin's demanding foreign military aid and intelligence to Ukraine is stopped as part of any longer-term deal, I suppose. Although, as Tim Marshall was just explaining to us a few moments ago, the information that we've got from the White House account of the call and the Kremlin account of the call are somewhat different. Tim Marshall, I'm pleased to say, is still with us, the author of Prisoners of Geography and former foreign correspondent. Tim, thank you for hanging on with us. If we can just sort of pick up where we were chatting there, I think maybe actually let's start with Europe at this point. What position this leaves Europe in this evening?
Pretty much, I think, where they were, because they still need to somehow get together, not a peacekeeping, but a peace observing, a ceasefire observing force, because it's important to underline what we think has been agreed is that both sides will no longer, for the next 30 days, target each other's infrastructure and energy infrastructure. They won't be going after oil supplies, etc. It is not a ceasefire on the ground, where Russia at the moment has a slight advantage. It's pressing forward, so it's not on the ground. So they seem to have agreed that, although we are going to need clarification from 3 sides. We need clarification from the United States that it is their understanding that what Russia wants about halting military aid and intelligence is a reference to the longer-term ceasefire, both on the ground and in the air and at sea. Or are they talking about, yes, we agreed to this 30-day limited ceasefire, only if you switch off the intel again? That's not quite clear. So then we also need clarification from Moscow that reference they've made, because it's not in the American readout, the reference the Russians have made refers to the longer term negotiations, not to this 30 days. And then, of course, we need clarification from Kyiv that, yeah, they agree for it to what we've heard. I suspect they will. Now, there's a lot more to unpack after that in the two readouts. But for me, in the immediate, in the next few hours, that point needs to be clarified.
Yeah, clarification required. What do you make of the overall tone of what we are getting at here? Because going into this phone call, the assessment had been Putin is keen to drag things out indefinitely, to sort of add nuance and sort of sub-points to any headline negotiation issue in order to just keep fighting, basically, while appealing to Donald Trump's sense of perhaps ego and desire for a victory and ceasefire. What are you sensing as has been the strategy and approach from both, from what we have so far?
Well, I disagree slightly with the way, I know it's not your opinion, Calum, the way you just framed that. He was trying to drag it out. He was trying to drag it out for 4 years. Well, 3 years, waiting for Trump to come back to power and to get to this moment we've now got to. But I don't think in the last few weeks he's been signalling that he's dragging it out over a really long period. I think he wants a deal on his terms. And I think he will settle for stealing the 4 provinces that they've now say they've annexed, and of course Crimea. And I think that is what's going to happen. So, which is going to lead me to Europe in a moment. I think he'll settle for that. Say he's got a buffer zone. Say he has, defeated NATO, which is how it's framed in Russia. But I do think he wants an end to this. The economy really is hurting. The Ukrainians are reaching their energy infrastructure. But when it comes back to Europe, the reason they're not even mentioned in this is that this is cooked up between Moscow and Washington. Yeah. Ukraine has been bullied into it. And one of your listeners wrote in, and I understand this emotion and this support for Ukraine, but your listener wrote in, emailed saying, they have to reconquer all the territory, but it's not going to happen. It is not going to happen without massive American help, which isn't going to happen. And the Europeans, at the best, and I think they will be able to do this if the fighting continues, is to put enough in to hold the line. Not to reconquer all that territory, 20% of the country that Russia has stolen, just to hold the line. And so the Americans have concluded this is the reality. Let's get out of it. Brief point. If we get a chance, I wouldn't mind talking about Iran because that's mentioned here. But brief point. Today in the Bundestag, the German parliament, they voted through a measure to have something outside of the constitution. The German constitution does not allow a level of debt past a certain level. They've amended their constitution today to allow extra borrowing for military because they realise their military is 10 to 15 years behind most of modern Europe's. The Bundeswehr is in no shape to do very much at all. But it's going to take them a decade to get into shape. It's going to take most of the European militaries a decade to get into shape. So this idea that we are going to supply Ukraine to the hilt and get them to reconquer and push Russia back to its borders is just nonsense. Yeah. And like I said, the Americans have drawn that conclusion, then they're pulling the plug at the moment. So that awful phrase again, Calum. The strong do what they will, the weak suffer what they must. Yeah. It's awful.
It is awful. Tim, do stay there just because I want to go for a couple of minutes just to Charlotte MacDonald Gibson, the Times US correspondent. Charlotte, welcome to the programme.
Hi.
What is the feeling that you're picking up after the conclusion of this phone call?
Well, as you said, we have these contradictions between what's come out of the Kremlin and the statement we've had from the White House. Well, I think Donald Trump's allies in the sort of MAGA universe, calling this a success, sort of saying, well, OK, maybe it's not exactly what we hoped for, but the alternative was nothing. The alternative was just a resumption of business as usual. So they're trying to paint this sort of 30-day ceasefire on energy and infrastructure targets as something. But I do think that in terms of the expectations we had here going into this call, it has fallen short. And I think the backlash to that is going to grow in the coming hours. And I I also think that the big issue is, though, is President Trump has a lot riding on this. I mean, he's portrayed himself as this peacemaker, and he keeps bigging up, his role and how he is going to be the guy who ended peace. He's going to get the Nobel Peace Prize, this kind of thing. So he has so much riding on this.
We may have lost Charlotte. I think the line was a little bit shonky to begin with. Sadly, we've lost Charlotte MacDonald-Gibson, the Times US correspondent. Let's go back to Tim Marshall. Tim, this idea that Trump might try to claim something, the Nobel Peace Prize, hangs in the balance, potentially. Oh, in fact, Charlotte's back with us. Sorry, Tim. Let's just make the most of Charlotte. Charlotte, sorry, we were interrupted there, just as you were saying that Trump will be trying to work out claiming a victory from this.
Yeah, exactly. And we're expecting him to sign some executive orders in about an hour's time. And we're hoping that then there will be some questions put to him. And it'll be incredibly interesting to see how he frames this. Because as I said, he has a lot riding on the success of this peace deal that he's bigged up for, since the start of his administration. He's promised this peace. He's promised to be the peacemaker. So how he presents the outcome of this call in the next couple of hours, I think is going to be crucial.
Fascinating. Charlotte, I know you've loads to do, but we're very grateful for you speaking to us just now. Charlotte MacDonald-Gibson, the Times US correspondent. So then, as has become tradition, if President Trump is signing executive orders, he tends to say lots of things out loud as well. Tim Marshall, just for a kind of concluding thought from you, you want to mention Iran. How do they fit into all of this?
Well, it fits in because, as I alluded to earlier, the American administration, in my view, has come to the conclusion that Russia is not a threat to America. It's proved it can't even reach Kyiv. Therefore, it can't dominate the entire continent, reach the Atlantic and look across, which has been American policy for 120 years. When it comes to Europe, no one power will arise to challenge America. So they've drawn that conclusion, and they've got other things to do now. Hence, dissing NATO and their allies. China is top of that list, and fairly high to it, and it's going to get warmer and warmer this year, is Iran. So briefly, on the Iranian, the paragraph 3 of the White House readout is very interesting. The leaders, plural, spoke broadly about the Middle East, etc., etc. They further discussed the need to stop proliferation of strategic weapons and will engage with each other to ensure the broadest possible application. And then the two leaders shared the view that Iran should never be in a position to destroy Israel. What that means is if it's true on both sides, the two leaders agree Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. That is coming down the line now. The Americans are far more interested in that, and with Russian cooperation, because Russia has a lot of pressure when it comes to Iran. That is higher up the White House's to-do list than Ukraine is.
Tim, we're very grateful for your time, your expertise and your analysis. Thank you ever so much. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Tim Marshall there, who is author of Prisoners of Geography. Right, lots still to understand, lots still to analyse. I'm pleased to say that Rachel Cunliffe, Associate Political Editor at the New Statesman, and Noa Hoffman, Political Correspondent at The Sun, are standing by. Hello, both.
Hello.
Hello.
Exciting evening.
Gosh, there's always lots happening at the moment, isn't there? Don't take a breath, because we will be right back to consider exactly what all of this means, and I think to try to fill in some of the gaps, or at least to highlight where the gaps in our knowledge are as things stand, which I think is equally as important at this point. So do stay with us. This is MacDonald and Friends on Times Radio in association with NatWest Cushion, making workplace pensions and savings easy. Search NatWest Cushion to find out more. It's 16 minutes after 6.
Carol
with NatWest Cushion, putting your employees in control of their financial future. Search NatWest Cushion to find out more.
Good evening. It's 18 minutes past 6 on Times Radio. This is MacDonald and Friends. We're continuing to bring you analysis after we learned that Russia has rejected a ceasefire and an unconditional ceasefire, crucially. Although a 30-day ceasefire where they will not target energy and infrastructure has been agreed between Presidents Putin and Trump. Right, let's speak to Noa Hoffman, political correspondent at The Sun. Hello.
Hello.
Good to see you. And Rachel Cunliffe, associate political editor at the new Statesman. Hello.
Hello.
Thank you both for being here. Rachel, should we start with you? Because this is... there are gaps in what we know. Based on the experts we are speaking to so far, we are still awaiting responses from European leaders, from Sir Keir Starmer, on exactly what this means and exactly how it all shakes out. One thing we do know is that new talks are going to begin in the Middle East immediately. How much of this is a win for Donald Trump? How much of it is him conceding to President Putin?
It's interesting because I was in the studio a week ago where we were watching Marco Rubio, US Secretary of State, talk about how Ukraine had agreed pretty much unconditional terms for a ceasefire, and the words he used were Russia, the ball's in your court, or the ball's in Russia's court. And there was a huge amount of optimism that behind the scenes work would have been underway to sort of make such a bold statement, and that if Ukraine had been pressured, forced, coerced into agreeing that ceasefire pretty much unconditionally, then there would be similar pressure exerted on Russia. And from the details, we haven't had very many details, but from the details that we have had tonight, it really is quite disappointing in that regard. Your US correspondent just now, she referred to it as falling short of expectations. Obviously, you do have the ceasefire on energy infrastructure sites, although we do know that those oil and gas sites are more critical to Russia at this moment in the war than they are to Ukraine. So it's difficult to see what it is that deal maker King Donald Trump actually has got out of this. I mean, he went into these negotiations saying that Russia had all the cards, Ukraine had none of the cards, and really making it very easy for Vladimir Putin to sort of sit back and say, come to me, what have you got? And it's going to be really interesting to see how Trump tries to play this as a win for his deal-making skills when there really doesn't seem to be very much there. The one thing, though, that, as Tim Marshall mentioned a moment ago, maybe the thing that Trump was able to get, the concession he was able to get from Putin, was about Iran and access to a nuclear weapon. So maybe the concession that he won wasn't really anything to do with Ukraine at all, and sadly Ukraine was just a bargaining chip.
Yeah. Noah, I'm quite intrigued to just pick up on comments from Alexander Daniluk, who is a former finance minister and secretary of Ukraine's National Defence and Security Council, who told us about half an hour ago, 40 minutes ago, when this was just breaking, that he feels betrayed. Where is Ukraine in the groups that are being set up to begin negotiations? I don't see Ukraine here. Ukraine will be forced into concessions. This is the beginning of a disastrous process. And going into this phone call, there was concern about Ukraine's lack of involvement. This was clearly a call between Trump and Putin. And after the phone call, Ukrainians are fearful that they've been betrayed.
I mean, I wouldn't even say it's after the phone call. I was in Kiev like 2.5 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and those exact sentiments were being relayed to me on every street corner, in every restaurant, in every meeting, whether it was with MPs or with civil society. So I think they perhaps won't be too surprised at the developments today because they were locked out of the conversation a long time ago. And what that means is that Europe needs to step up. I think they have kick-started that process with this so-called coalition of the willing, but there is a long way to go, particularly, as mentioned, with defence spending among European states. But we're also going to run into trouble there as well. We saw Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni say, I think it was yesterday, that she doesn't want to see any Italian boots on the ground in Ukraine. She really pushed back on this idea of a European sort of peacekeeping force on the ground. But what this phone call should signify to Ukraine, and especially to Westminster, is that the US cannot be relied on anymore. We learnt that a long time ago, and it is now time for Europe to step up and become a sort of superpower once again.
We are streaming our conversation on the Times Radio YouTube channel. The chat is active. Joel says the phone call showed how weak Trump is. This is not Trump's deal. It's yet another Trump fail. Somebody suggests that Putin left him waiting for the call. I would just add context to that. Putin was speaking to a room full of sort of businessmen, read oligarchs, when the call was due to begin. And there was actually a question put to him about, aren't you supposed to be on the phone to Trump? And he was like, kind of brushed it off. Don't worry too much about that. I don't think he was overly late, but I do think he was made potentially to wait as well. What else? This person says no agreement has been made as yet. So there's lots of unknowns, I think, at this point. Let's bring in now Jim Townsend, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defence for Europe and NATO. Jim, good evening from us. Hi, Jim, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, good.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we've got you now, loud and clear. Here comes the first European reaction, in fact, Jim. This is from German Chancellor Scholz on the Trump-Putin call. There cannot be an agreement without Ukraine, yet here we are.
Well, it's a great question. We don't know where this is going in terms of, so now do they go to Ukraine and tell Ukraine, so what's your view on this? Are you you want to tweak it here, tweak it there, or is it take it or leave it? Are they going to go to Ukraine and say this is the best we can do, and you're going to have to be, you're going to have to accept this? One of the things that is part of this I haven't heard anyone talk about is Russia is saying that there's going to be no rearmament of Ukraine. Russia is saying we want the Ukraine mobilization to stop, and all foreign intelligence and military aid has to stop as well. That's huge. That's unacceptable. And so, does Ukraine have a right to say anything about this? It's just not clear where this goes from here. Is this something that's agreed between the two, and is take it or leave it, or what? I don't understand.
And so, will they be forced into? I'm trying to understand the diplomatic nature of this, Jim. If two sides are negotiating over the heads of Ukraine in this circumstance, I actually can't piece together in my own mind, and hopefully your expertise can help us out here, how this will work. I mean, there are historic examples, aren't there, of countries negotiating over and above others and then it just being forced on them. Are we going to see a repeat of history in that way?
Well, I don't see any other way.
Right.
That's what's so awful about this process is it's just not done this way.
But it has been done this way in the past, hasn't it? I wonder why Zelensky's being left out.
Well, it's usually been done after the military defeat of a country where the peace is imposed on them. Unconditional surrender, and here is what's going to happen. But that's not happened here. There hasn't been a military defeat. And you're right. I mean, Ukraine has been locked out of these talks. They were not part of the phone call, obviously. They weren't part of the Saudi discussion. And that's because they don't want Ukraine in there throwing sand into the gears and making it harder to get to what Trump wants. And that's a quick agreement with Putin so that he can walk away. I mean, this is a temporary ceasefire. This is not the big negotiated long-term peace thing. This is just 30 days. So my feeling is that, they're going to get a 30-day temporary ceasefire and Trump will walk. He's going to turn to everybody else and say, okay, now you take it from here. You do the technical agreements about the Black Sea and all the nuts and bolts of this. I've got to go on to other things. I mean, he's not going to be in this thing for the long term. So, and finally, just to highlight what you all were talking about too, this thing about strategic weapons sounds very suspicious to me. It sounds like Russia has told the U.S. we don't think that we don't want Iran to have a bomb. We don't want to imperil Israel on this. So whether it is by bombing them or whether it's cutting a deal with them, that Iranian nuclear capability has got to go away. And we, Russia, we support that.
I was just going to ask, would you say it's possibly reading in too much to this readout that this could even be laying the groundwork for a potential US incursion or airstrikes on Iran?
That's what I took away.
Yeah, I also did. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
And in terms of the process and the way that this is being imposed on Ukraine, we believe with Ukraine being locked out of the negotiations, what pushback do you envisage there being from, others in the US, others in the global community, Europe, elsewhere, about the process and the terms and the gap, I suppose, between what we were expecting, what we were hoping for last week and what it seems like we're getting tonight?
Well, that's a great question. I think Europe's got a role in this too. There was nothing discussed, it sounds like, about the backstop and European forces at some point being in Ukraine. At some point. Again, this is long term. But there doesn't sound like there was anything talked about that. So what is Europe's role right now? Europe's going to have to say something. We heard from the Germans. But what are others going to say? What will Keir Starmer say about this? This is disappointing. And this is because it's not a process that we're used to dealing with, a diplomatic process that is predictable. This is something different, and I don't know how one pushes back against this. Does UK, France, Germany go to the U.S. and say we're not going to take part in something like this? This is wrong to Ukraine. You've thrown Ukraine under the bus. You've left them defenseless now if they're not going to be able to mobilize and not get assistance, and we can't live with that? Or can these three countries go in there and try to change things? But they won't change Trump's mind, and certainly not Putin's either. So I don't see anything that would change or moderate the trajectory we are on right now set by this phone call.
Jim, thank you very much. Thank you for speaking with us. It's always good to get your take. That's Jim Townsend, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defence for Europe and NATO. And Noah and Rachel are staying with us. Some of your thoughts here. Nigel says the White House is trying to spin a complete capitulation. Bob says the lessons of appeasement from the 30s are being disregarded in respect to Ukraine. The human cost already paid with Ukrainian blood is for nothing. The UN, useless. NATO, powerless without the US. The UK finds itself without any meaningful self-defence or an effective attack force, yet we are in pole position in the coalition of the willing. When are we going to have the truth told to us? Noah, just before we go to the news, I was going to ask you about Keir Starmer's comments. So he spoke to President Trump last night, didn't he? Issued some comments today last night as well, ahead of the phone call between Trump and Putin, which, there was more detail in this, but he said Ukraine must be in the strongest possible position. And I'm just not sure if that is what has been realised today after this phone call.
As with a lot of the sort of Trump-Starmer phone calls, the readouts that we get from Downing Street is just language. Right. And it's the same language and it's the same sort of sentiment. What we don't see is it really having a huge impact on the negotiations, on what happens on the ground in the US and Russia. So I would say more warm words, but let's see what the next development is with the coalition of the willing. What is the next policy decision, the next practical step beyond language? And
Rachel, this message from Catherine says, Starmer's so-called bridge isn't much use now, is it? The bullies are in charge, we're irrelevant. This whole thing is just gutting.
Well, gutting is certainly the word, and it does, I think, throw into a different light Starmer's meeting with Trump a few weeks ago that was at the time considered to have gone very well. But obviously the key priority that Starmer wanted to get from that meeting was commitment to a US backstop. There's been very little talk about that at all, and we don't even know from the readouts that we've had that Russia would be willing to accept European peacekeeping troops in the area, regardless of whether the US was involved or not. So it is difficult to see what the UK government has to show for its efforts. Obviously, we can only hope and assume that more behind-the-scenes back-channel conversations are still ongoing.
And there is a consideration. We're talking about this complete cessation of foreign military aid and the provision of intelligence information to Kyiv being a key demand from Russia. There is a thought here that this might not happen. The 30-day ceasefire might not happen because that condition is not going to be welcomed, you would imagine. It's an impossible demand as far as Europe is concerned. It remains to be seen. We will continue to bring you reaction and analysis. We've got Noah and Rachel staying with us and lots more guests to come as well. We'll speak shortly to Lieutenant General David Leakey, former Director General of the European Union Military Staff. Stay with us. Laura's got the news now at 6:32.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Thank you. Good evening. Russia says it's agreed to stop striking energy facilities in Ukraine for 30 days as a first step towards a halt in fighting. It follows a 90-minute call between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. The Kremlin is demanding foreign military aid and intelligence to Ukraine is stopped as part of any ceasefire. But Britain's former ambassador to Russia, Sir Tony Brenton, believes Moscow does want peace.
He certainly doesn't want to utterly alienate Trump. He wants to come out of this, yes, with the war over, yes, able to present to his people a moderate success, which you will certainly be able to do if you can come away with some territorial gains and an assurance that Ukraine will never join NATO.
UN chiefs have called for hostilities in Gaza to end after Israel launched a series of airstrikes. Hamas officials say more than 400 people have been killed as the 2-month ceasefire there appears in tatters. The Work and Pensions Secretary has announced a series of cuts and reforms to the benefit system, including scrapping capability assessments for universal credit claimants. Liz Kendall has told MPs the system's too complex and is holding the country back. A 4-year-old girl has died in a house fire in Northumberland. Police say a woman and another child are in hospital following last night's blaze in Lynmouth. And a man's been found guilty of stealing a solid gold toilet from Blenheim Palace. The £4.75 million working loo had been plumbed in as part of an art exhibition. And for a news bulletin when you want it, search for the Times News Briefing on the Times Radio app.
Times Radio app from the App Store or Google Play today.
Times Radio Drive with NatWest Cushion. Empower your employees to feel good about their pension. Search NatWest Cushion today. Capital at risk.
Good evening, it's 6:36. MacDonald and Friends continues imminently. Today we're joined by Noa Hoffman, political correspondent at The Sun, and Rachel Cunliffe, associate political editor at the new Statesman. More of their thoughts to come. Also more of your thoughts. Amanda says this is a stitch-up. Putin is laying the groundwork to walk in and take over Ukraine when they are ready, and Trump is complicit. Who else have we got? This person's anonymous. If Trump wants to end the war once and for all, he should tell Putin to withdraw from all areas of Ukraine, or he will send troops and weapons and bring the whole of NATO with him. If Putin does this, then maybe lift sanctions. This should have been done back in 2014. Or does international law mean nothing? Thanks for your thoughts so far. WhatsApp us 0333 003 2353. Kate Borsay's here ahead of looking after you on Times Radio from 7 o'clock this evening. Hello.
Hello. I'm digging into the detail on that Vladimir Putin-Donald Trump phone call and the difference in readouts between the two countries as well. Most strikingly, as you've been saying, Calum, about the fact that it was agreed by parties that any ceasefire should mean the complete cessation of foreign military aid and the provision of intelligence information to Kyiv. And most importantly, I wonder what Western leaders think of that. People who've been supporting, countries who've been supporting Ukraine in their fight against Russia. For this to be a demand or an agreement, it's a key condition. That is how it's phrased in the readout from Russia. And also whether they feel they've been sold down the river by both Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. Donald Trump, the great peacemaker. Well, this is his version of peace for Vladimir Putin's version of peace. And with it, there have to be concessions for Ukraine, a limited ceasefire, airstrikes to halt on energy and infrastructure, military action in the Black Sea could cease a little bit later, but some of those conditions are puzzling. And a prisoner exchange tomorrow, 19th of March, is what's been indicated, 175 for 175 people. We are going to dig into that as much as possible. We've got John Bolton, the former US National Security Advisor, with us. We'll find out what he makes of it. We'll also speak to a Ukrainian MP for Vladimir Zelensky's party. We'll dig into welfare today with Brian Leishman, Labour MP, who's spoken out vociferously against the welfare cuts. We'll find out what he makes now. We've finally got Liz Kendall's version of what she's going to do. And of course, we've just had word from the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and that comes on the back of his Foreign Minister Gideon Saar saying, around an hour or so ago, that those attacks on Gaza overnight were not a one-day attack. It's news flying around all over the place. We'll try our best to keep abreast of it.
Yeah, it's a busy one. Thank you, Kate. Good to see you. Kate will be back at 7 o'clock this evening. Just on a slightly lighter note, I forgot to commit to memory that we are streaming on YouTube at the moment, and having just indulged in a chicken fajita wrap during the news. The YouTube comments are now alight, asking what I was eating rather. This live Times Radio is making me hungry, says Percy. Johnny says peanut butter and jelly. No. Chris says that sandwich looks pretty good. It was. It wasn't a bacon sarnie.
This is how hard you're working that you don't get breaks, Callum.
Yeah, there's no breaks, and also at the risk of straying off what is a very important conversation, I'm going to the pub at 7 and I just wanted to eat something before I get there. So there we are.
Very sensible.
Thank you. Yeah, very old and boring. Anyway, thank you all for watching on YouTube. Really appreciate that as well. Right, let's crack on. We want to speak now to General David Leakey, former Director General of the European Union Military Staff. David, good evening to you. Hi, thanks so much for joining us. So this question comes in from Dayton, one of our listeners on WhatsApp, saying, do you think that this pause will help Ukraine at all? Does Russia have enough long-range munitions for this to impact the tempo? Strikes will likely maintain pace on military targets. So for clarity, what has been agreed this evening is a ceasefire when it comes to Ukraine's energy targets for 30 days. So Dayton's question is, will this help Ukraine at all?
Look, there are some positives and negatives in this, and you've just hit on one of the positives of this conversation. The positives are what I would describe as confidence-building start to negotiations. Is very typical in ceasefire and peace negotiations. If there is either side or both sides want to indicate an intent to engage, and one of the ways they do it is by making some concessions, making some proposals as either a negotiating tactic or a genuine confidence building measure. And this willingness to refrain from striking energy and infrastructure targets for 30 days, I would put into that category. I wouldn't be optimistic about it, but it's a start. That's one of the positives. The other positive that you can take out of this is the prisoner exchange. These happen pretty routinely. They've been going on during the conflict anyway, so it's a pretty small fry. It's big, it's important for the prisoners themselves and for I think it's 23 seriously injured Ukrainian servicemen as well. So that's a good thing to happen, but it's not a real milestone or significant milestone. Okay. Those are, I think, the two positives. I'd hit on one other one, and that was the fact that there's a dialogue that's going, that it's going to go on, that it's going to happen in the Middle East, and that they want to tackle other wider subjects, such as peace in the Middle East and also strategic proliferation, arms proliferation. I'd make one other small comment about this, and this is this business about Putin suggesting that Russian and US, American ice hockey players start playing hockey together.
Yes, so we haven't mentioned this yet. Let me just jump in on that because I just want to read the exact line because I was just noting this myself, David, and I think it's worth reflecting what it is that has emerged in all of this. That Donald Trump, this is from the Kremlin readout of the call, Donald Trump supported Vladimir Putin's idea to organise hockey matches in the US and Russia between Russian and American players playing in the NHL and the KHL. So that's from the readout. Go on, what was your analysis of that?
My analysis of that is that the cartoonists are going to have a field day. It's going to turn into the frozen conflict, the ice hockey frozen conflict.
Yeah.
Look, moving ahead to a more serious thing, the negatives on this, and there are lots of negatives on this, and the first one is this: there is no immediate prospects of a ceasefire, of a peace, particularly on the front line. All talk about further negotiations on the modalities of how a ceasefire might be managed, the modalities of how it's going to be managed, without even agreeing the principle of a ceasefire. So that I don't think that doesn't show prospects for an immediate acceleration of the process towards that. So the second thing. And you've touched on this already, the no mobilization by Ukraine or external or foreign arming of Ukraine. Well, I don't think that's going to be acceptable to the Ukrainians or probably even the Europeans. But here's another point on this. Where's the mutuality in this? And you might say, well, nobody's arming the Russians. They are. North Korea is arming and supporting the Russians, and China is providing a lot of material support to the Russians. So I think the Ukrainians might reasonably ask for some mutuality on that point.
David, can I just ask? I'm so sorry to jump in because something you've said is kind of ringing in my mind a little, and I suppose as we get further into the analysis of this might become clearer. Are we jumping the gun, at the risk of using an unfortunate phrase, to suggest that this ceasefire is agreed, given that there seems to be a condition in the Kremlin readout that the US and Europe, the aid is cut off to Ukraine and Ukraine stops mobilisation? When we say a ceasefire has been a limited ceasefire has been agreed, are we stretching that, or is that the case as far as you're concerned?
It's absolutely not the case. There's nothing in the communiques put out by either the Russians or the Americans that has that sort of language in it that the ceasefire has agreed. So no, it's not. As I said at the beginning, this is just the sort of first steps. And the ceasefire is not between the US and the Russians. The ceasefire's got to be between the Ukrainians and the Russians. So the Ukrainians have got to agree it, and they haven't commented yet. So no, a ceasefire has absolutely, definitely not been agreed, other than in Putin's mind and subject to Putin's conditions. To that extent, you're correct.
Yes, fair enough. And David, I think that's helpful, if slightly disconcerting, grounding in where we're at here. I just want to bring you this from our Wall Street Journal colleague Jane Litvinenko, reporting from Ukraine, who in the last 20 seconds has posted on X sounds of air defence firing booming across central Kyiv this evening, which is the reality of all of this, alongside what's been described on this programme as the theatre of the Trump-Putin phone call already. David, thank you very much. Thank you for your time this evening. That's General David Leakey, a former Director General of the European Union Military Staff. Just as a sort of an add-on to this, President Macron of France says the approval by the German Parliament of plans for a massive spending surge in hopes of reviving economic growth and scaling up military spending for a new era of European collective defence is excellent news. So outgoing German Chancellor is Olaf Scholz, of course, and Macron says, I want to congratulate you on the Bundestag's historic vote. Good news for Germany, good news for Europe. It will enable it to do more for defence and investment. Rachel, it's fascinating language that we're getting there from Macron, who there's an undercurrent of we can still punch through this thing, we can still increase defence spending, we can still unite as Europe in the face of the Russian aggressor.
Well, I think what tonight has proved, sort of more than anything else, is that the need for Europe to take its own defence and security seriously has never been greater, and that, as Noah was saying a moment ago, we've known that the US is unreliable and unpredictable for a while, but I think that regardless of what does progress in terms of the ceasefire, if it develops, if it doesn't develop, then Europe has learnt a very hard lesson from developments in recent weeks. It has been really interesting, as somebody who sort of has been watching the EU process over the last sort of 10 to 15 years, how quickly they were able to move on this. The EU is usually accused of being an institution that moves at a glacial pace, infighting, unable to agree anything, and obviously we haven't seen the results of it yet, but we've got very strong language coming out of France, coming out of Germany, and coming out of sort of the EU bureaucratic centre itself, that defence and security now has to be a priority, and that trumps some of the fiscal considerations that had over the last decade kind of proved blocking points to that.
I've just been told that a number 10 quote is on its way, so I will keep an eye out on that and read it out as we get it. But yeah, it does make me wonder why could we not have seen this speed and this sense of urgency earlier? And I know hindsight is a wonderful thing, but would this conflict look very different if, going back all the way to Angela Merkel, who's largely been seen as sort of critical in how much power and hold Russia has had over Europe, if we took defence more seriously, if we didn't just sort of leave defence as an issue by the wayside, would we be in this position at all? And I'm glad now that we've crossed that bridge and things are ramping up. It is probably too little too late, but maybe this can set a precedent in other areas of the EU's heavily red tape ridden bureaucratic process to just become a more efficient machine and really take Europe back to being a superpower where it belongs, especially in this world where we see the big realignment of the US, China, and Russia sort of trying to muscle their way in as the dictators of the world.
Really interesting, this. So reaction on its way then from number 10. We'll keep you up to date with that. As we've mentioned, we've heard from President Macron and Scholz, French President and German Chancellor, outgoing German Chancellor. So here we have, let me just see. So yes, Olaf Scholz saying that while the agreement to end Russian attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure is a good start, there cannot be an agreement without Ukraine. He said the next step must be a complete ceasefire for Ukraine and as quickly as possible. Of course, it is clear that we both agree on this too. And Macron said, we've been promoting peace since day one, and that cannot be achieved without Ukraine taking part in talks. So that's echoing what David Leakey was just saying to us as well, that actually Ukraine needs to be brought into this. I wonder if that is the sort of sentiment that number 10 will be distributing in the next little while as well. Do stay with us on Times Radio as we continue to bring you reaction and analysis to the President Trump and President Putin phone call from earlier today. This is MacDonald and Friends on Times Radio in association with NatWest Cushion, putting your employees in control of their financial future. Search NatWest Cushion to find out more. It is 10 to 7. Good evening. Thanks for being with us on MacDonald and Friends. Kate Borst is on the way for you at 7 o'clock. The analysis will not stop. She'll keep you going all through the evening. Let me just bring you this. President Trump has posted on Truth Social this evening, and Dan Scavino, who is an assistant to the president and is the deputy chief of staff indeed at the White House, has shared it on X. Let me read you this. It's fairly long, but I think it's important. Donald Trump says, "My phone conversation today with President Putin of Russia was a very good and productive one. We agreed to an immediate ceasefire on all energy and infrastructure, with an understanding that we will be working quickly to have a complete ceasefire and ultimately an end, in capital letters, end to this very horrible war between Russia and Ukraine. This war would never have started if I were president. Many elements of a contract for peace were discussed, including the fact that thousands of soldiers are being killed, and both President Putin and President Zelensky would like to see it end. That process is now in full force and effect, and we will, hopefully, for the sake of humanity, get the job done." Rachel.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, we were talking at the start of this programme about how Donald Trump was going to try and sell this as a win for his deal-making capabilities. I don't think we're any the wiser there beyond the fact that he is going to try and sell it as a win. And it'll be really interesting for me to see how strands of the US Republican Party react to this, because I think this makes Trump look incredibly weak. You were talking earlier in the programme, Calum, about him being kept waiting and Putin making a joke out of it. We know that Putin actually does quite like to toy with and humiliate foreign leaders. And I think that there are elements in what we've seen tonight of Donald Trump being played by Putin.
Let's bring in Alexander Moresko, the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Ukrainian Parliament and a member of President Zelensky's party. Alexander, welcome to the programme.
Thank you.
How do you react to what we understand has happened here? President Trump there saying we've agreed to an immediate ceasefire on all energy and infrastructure.
Well, while I was waiting for my turn to speak on your radio, the world has received very clear answer from Putin what it's all about. Just like 5 minutes ago, it started with air raid sirens going off, and a few minutes ago, I heard very loud explosions from my window, and I live not far from the center of Kyiv. This is a very clear-cut answer Putin gave to Trump, to the whole world about his intentions. You know, Putin claims he said today that he had issued an order to stop bombarding Ukraine, to stop shelling Ukraine's infrastructure. But he continues to do that, and he will continue because, you know, we should understand very simple truth. He will never renounce his goal to destroy Ukraine, to subjugate Ukraine. And everything he will be saying, everything he will be doing is subordinated to this goal to destroy Ukraine. And what happened today, you know, it's a trap prepared by Putin for Trump. And when Mr. Trump writes in his tweet, in his post on X, and he uses the term the Ukraine war, you know, this is outrageous. There is no the Ukraine war. There is Russia's war against Ukraine. As for ideas to help Mr. Trump in the Middle East, you know, to me, Putin implies the following. He says to Mr. Trump, I will help you to I will make concessions in the Middle East. I will help you with the Middle East. I will help you with non-proliferation of nuclear weaponry and so on. But I have only one condition. Give me Ukraine. Give me Ukraine in the sphere of my influence. Allow me to destroy Ukraine. This is what it's all about and nothing more.
In terms of what we understand is happening here, one of your Ukrainian colleagues earlier on this programme said he felt betrayed and he was questioning where Ukraine is in all of this. Is it possible to anticipate what the political response will be from Ukraine? Could it be said that there is something to be welcomed of a 30-day ceasefire, even if it is conditional, even however temporary that is, that actually it could be a step forward towards peace?
Well, the thing and the truth is that our president has agreed unconditionally, without any conditions whatsoever, to Mr. Trump's ceasefire proposal. We did it. We said firmly yes, without any conditions. What happened with today's phone call? Putin didn't say yes. He added conditions to his so-called agreement, which are aimed to create a situation or create conditions for destroying Ukraine, because he continues to insist on stopping mobilization, on stopping providing weaponry to Ukraine. So his goal is to weaken Ukraine during these 30 days and to strengthen Russia, because he's not going to stop producing weaponry. He's not going to stop enlisting servicemen in his army. His goal is to make us weaker and to make Russia stronger. So the question is, what will be after 30 days? I don't have answer to this question. It's extremely difficult question for our president to agree or not to agree. But we know for sure that Putin will use these 30 days, this so-called ceasefire, to destroy us.
Alexander, thank you ever so much. Thank you for joining us. Alexander Maresko, the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Ukrainian Parliament. I think it's fair to say that the Ukrainians were excluded from the Trump-Putin phone call, as you would have expected, I suppose, given the way it was framed, the way it was set up, that these two men are operating above Ukraine, or below Ukraine, depending on your perspective, I suppose. And the two Ukrainian officials that we have heard from on this programme tonight have both shared the exact same sentiment about their level of concern as to the exclusion of Ukraine in these conversations. Rachel Cunliffe, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And Noa Hoffman, thank you.
Thank you.
It's great to have you both with us. Noa from The Sun, Rachel from the New Statesman, thank you very much for having me. It's a hugely consequential evening once again on Times Radio. Kate Borsey will see you through the rest of it. Have a good one.
Across the UK, on DAB digital radio, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio, the voice of the Times.
Thanks, Calum. Have a great night. It's 7 o'clock. This is Kate Borsey and the Evening Edition.